Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now, let's start. London, 1816, a year without a summer, though the ton scarcely noticed, preoccupied as they were with the far more pressing matters of matrimony, misalliances, and the mysterious arrival of one Miss Millicent Osborne to their hallowed ranks. It is a truth universally acknowledged that the arrival of a new face in London society causes a ripple of interest comparable to that of a pebble dropped in a still pond. Miss Osborne, however, created not a ripple but a veritable tsunami. The daughter of a country gentleman whose fortunes had unexpectedly risen through a distant relative's bequest, she arrived with little more than her quick wit, uncommon beauty, and a chaperone in the form of her aunt, Lady Templeton, whose own reputation for eccentricity preceded her. "The girl has no fortune to speak of," whispered Lady Harrington behind her fan to the Countess of Pembroke during Lady Sutton's musicale. "And yet she carries herself as though she were a princess." Indeed, dear reader, Miss Millicent Osborne did possess an air of quiet confidence that belied her station. With chestnut curls that refused to be entirely tamed and eyes of the most remarkable amber hue, she had already attracted the attention of several eligible bachelors, and one notably ineligible duke. Frederick Jameson, the Duke of Westmoreland, was not in the market for a wife. At 28, he had successfully avoided matrimony through 7 seasons, earning himself the sobriquet the elusive Duke among disappointed mammas. Tall, with raven hair that had an unfortunate tendency to fall across his forehead in a manner both dashing and disarming, the Duke was as famous for his fortune as he was infamous for his fastidiousness. "His Grace inspects the silverware before dining," Lady Harrington had once reported with horrified fascination. "And has dismissed 3 housekeepers for improper dusting techniques. What a shame that such handsome features should be so often arranged in a scowl." But scowl he did, particularly when forced to attend social engagements, which he considered an imposition upon his carefully ordered existence. It was at the Marchioness of Claverley's ball that Miss Osborne and the Duke first crossed paths, or rather, crossed swords, if one may employ the metaphor. The ballroom glittered with candlelight, the chandeliers casting their golden glow upon the assembly. Ladies in silks and satins of every hue twirled in the arms of gentlemen in stark black and white, the very picture of elegance. Miss Osborne, in a gown of pale blue that brought out the warmth in her complexion, stood conversing with her newfound friend, Miss Charlotte Rutherford. "I find it all rather overwhelming," Millicent confessed. "In Somerset, we considered a gathering of 20 to be a crowd. Here, one can scarcely move without treading on someone's toes, figuratively or literally." Charlotte laughed. "You'll become accustomed to it. Though I should warn you about the Duke of Westmoreland. He's standing by the punch bowl, looking as though he's been served vinegar instead of lemonade." Millicent glanced in the direction indicated and found herself meeting the direct gaze of the most arresting pair of blue eyes she had ever encountered. Rather than looking away, as propriety dictated, she raised one eyebrow in silent challenge. The Duke, unused to such impertinence, particularly from an unknown young lady, found himself crossing the room before he had fully formed the intention to do so. "I do not believe we have been introduced," he said, his voice cool. "We have not," Millicent agreed cheerfully. "But as you have now approached me without an introduction, I believe we are equally at fault in matters of etiquette." Charlotte made a small, choked sound beside her. The Duke's eyes narrowed. "I am the Duke of Westmoreland, yes, I am aware," Millicent interrupted. "Your Grace's reputation precedes you." "And what reputation might that be?" he inquired, his tone dangerously soft. "That of a gentleman who values order above all things," she replied, with a smile that could have meant anything at all. A commendable quality, to be sure, though perhaps a trifle limiting. Before the Duke could formulate a suitably cutting response, Millicent performed a perfect curtsy. "If you'll excuse me, Your Grace, I believe the next dance is beginning, and I am promised to Mr. Rutherford." She swept away, leaving the Duke in the unprecedented position of being utterly lost for words. And so began the unlikely acquaintance between the fastidious Duke and the forthright Miss Osborne. Their encounters over the following weeks were brief but memorable, each leaving the Duke increasingly vexed and, though he would never admit it, intrigued. At Lady Pembroke's literary salon, he found Miss Osborne defending the merits of Gothic novels with such spirited eloquence that even he was almost persuaded of their value. At the Harringtons' garden party, she bested him at croquet and refused to simper apologetically for her victory. And at the theatre, when seated coincidentally in adjacent boxes, she had the temerity to disagree with his assessment of the lead actor's performance. "The man has all the emotional range of a teaspoon," the Duke pronounced during the intermission. "Perhaps your Grace has not considered that restraint itself can be a form of expression," Millicent countered. "Not unlike yourself, I imagine." The Duke was saved from responding by the return of Millicent's aunt, Lady Templeton, a plump, pleasant-faced woman whose fondness for turban-like headwear was matched only by her appetite for almond cakes. "Your Grace! How delightful to find you conversing with my niece. She has so few acquaintances in London, you know. Perhaps you might call upon us? We are residing in Portman Square for the season." The Duke, trapped by courtesy, inclined his head. "Perhaps." It was a noncommittal response, yet 3 days later, he found himself directing his coachman to Portman Square, telling himself it was merely to satisfy his curiosity about this provincial miss who seemed impervious to his rank. The Templeton residence, while respectable, was modest by ton standards. The Duke was shown into a drawing-room decorated in a style that suggested comfort rather than fashion, with books scattered about in a manner that would have horrified his own housekeeper. Lady Templeton greeted him effusively. "Your Grace! What an unexpected pleasure! Millicent, look who has come to call." Millicent, who had been arranging flowers by the window, turned with genuine surprise. "Your Grace! I had not thought you would actually accept my aunt's invitation." "I am full of surprises, Miss Osborne," he replied dryly. "Indeed? That would be a surprise in itself." Lady Templeton glanced between them, sensing the undercurrents. "I shall just see about some refreshments," she murmured, beating a tactical retreat. Alone, the Duke took the opportunity to study Miss Osborne more carefully. Without the distractions of a ballroom, he noted the intelligence in her gaze, the determined set of her chin, the way the afternoon light caught the auburn highlights in her hair. "You are staring, Your Grace," Millicent observed, returning to her flowers. "I am attempting to understand you, Miss Osborne." "A futile endeavor, according to my father. He claims I am as changeable as the weather. I find that hard to believe. You seem remarkably consistent in your forthrightness." Millicent smiled, genuinely this time. "Is that your diplomatic way of calling me impertinent?" "It is my accurate way of describing someone who appears unimpressed by the trappings of rank." She considered this. "I respect accomplishment and character far more than accidents of birth, 'tis true. Though I do not discount the responsibilities that come with privilege." A surprisingly nuanced view. "You seem surprised by many things about me, Your Grace. Perhaps your expectations were too narrowly defined." Their conversation was interrupted by the return of Lady Templeton, followed by a maid bearing tea. The visit proceeded with more conventional topics: the weather, unseasonably cold, the latest exhibition at Somerset House, worth seeing, and the upcoming Middleton ball, certain to be overcrowded. As the Duke took his leave, he found himself already planning his next call. A dangerous precedent, he thought, yet one he seemed powerless to resist. Word of the Duke's interest in Miss Osborne spread through the ton with the speed that only truly juicy gossip can achieve. Suddenly, the girl with no fortune to speak of found herself the object of renewed scrutiny. He visited her at home, Lady Harrington reported breathlessly to her circle, and was seen walking with her and her aunt in the park not once but twice. "Perhaps he simply enjoys her conversation," suggested the more charitable Countess of Pembroke. "A man like the Duke of Westmoreland does not seek out a woman for conversation alone," Lady Harrington retorted with the confidence of one who has never entertained the possibility that men might find women intellectually stimulating. Oh, dear reader, if only Lady Harrington could have observed the Duke and Miss Osborne during their encounters. She would have been scandalized to discover that conversation was indeed their primary occupation, though the content of said conversations might have raised even more eyebrows. "You cannot possibly believe that women are incapable of understanding politics," Millicent challenged as they strolled through Hyde Park, Lady Templeton following at a discreet distance. "I said no such thing," the Duke replied. "I merely suggested that most ladies of my acquaintance show little interest in the subject. Perhaps because gentlemen like yourself make it clear that their opinions are unwelcome." "I welcome your opinions, Miss Osborne, even when they are patently wrong." Millicent laughed. "Such generosity of spirit, Your Grace! I am overwhelmed." And so it continued, their verbal sparring becoming a source of private pleasure to them both, though neither would have admitted as much. The Middleton ball arrived, an event anticipated with particular fervor as it marked the midpoint of the season, when attachments began to solidify and matrimonial intentions became clear. Millicent, now established as a notable if not entirely conventional member of society, entered the ballroom with more confidence than she had felt at the Clavely affair. Her gown, a creation of ivory silk with delicate gold embroidery, was perhaps not the height of fashion, but it suited her admirably. The Duke, watching her entrance from his position near the windows, found himself holding his breath. "She cleans up rather well, doesn't she?" drawled Lord Pendleton at his elbow. "Though one hears her father's estate is mortgaged to the hilt." "Shame, really." The Duke gave him a look that would have frozen the Thames in August. "I was not aware you took such an interest in other gentlemen's financial affairs, Pendleton." "Merely making conversation, old boy," Pendleton said hastily, before finding urgent business elsewhere. The evening progressed pleasantly enough. Millicent danced with several partners, including Mr. Rutherford, Lord Pembroke's son, and the newly arrived Viscount Halsey, whose admiration was as obvious as it was unwelcome to the Duke. It was during a brief respite from dancing that disaster struck. Millicent, seeking a moment of quiet, had stepped onto the terrace. The night was cool but not unpleasant, the gardens below illuminated by strategically placed lanterns. She was admiring the effect when the Duke joined her. "Seeking refuge from your admirers, Miss Osborne?" "Merely some fresh air, Your Grace. The ballroom becomes rather close after several dances." "Indeed." He moved to stand beside her at the balustrade. "You seem to be enjoying the Viscount's company." "He is perfectly amiable," she replied, non-committally. "High praise indeed," the Duke said dryly. Millicent glanced at him. "Do I detect a note of criticism, Your Grace? Are you perhaps acquainted with some flaw in the Viscount's character that I should be aware of?" "Not at all. Halsey is considered quite a catch. Handsome, wealthy, and possessed of the happy ability to converse on any topic without offering a single original thought." Millicent couldn't help but laugh. "Now I am certain I detect criticism." The Duke's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps I simply prefer conversation with more substance." "As do I," Millicent admitted quietly. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the distant strains of the orchestra providing a soundtrack to the curious tension that had developed between them. The Duke found himself wanting to reach for her hand, a most improper impulse that he firmly suppressed. The moment was shattered by the arrival of Lady Harrington, who swept onto the terrace with the air of someone who has struck gold. "Miss Osborne!" "Your Grace!" "How unexpected to find you both here." "Alone." The emphasis she placed on the last word could not have been more pointed had it been a rapier. "We were just discussing the merits of substantive conversation, Lady Harrington," Millicent said smoothly. "A topic I'm sure you would find fascinating." Lady Harrington's smile tightened. "Indeed. Though perhaps it would be more appropriate to continue such discussions inside. People might talk, you know." "People always talk, Lady Harrington," the Duke observed. "It is one of the less appealing constants of society." Nevertheless, propriety demanded they return to the ballroom, where Lady Harrington wasted no time in spreading the news of their tete-a-tete. By the time Millicent and her aunt departed, whispers were circulating about a possible attachment between the Duke and Miss Osborne. The following morning, as Millicent was enjoying a late breakfast with her aunt, a delivery arrived, a magnificent bouquet of hothouse roses, accompanied by a note in a strong, masculine hand. "May I call upon you this afternoon? There is a matter of some importance I wish to discuss." "Westmoreland." Lady Templeton nearly spilled her tea. "Oh, my dear. This is most promising." Millicent, however, felt a curious sense of apprehension. The Duke's note was formal, almost brusque. It lacked the warmth that had begun to characterize their interactions. "I shall send a reply saying we will be at home," she decided, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The hours until the Duke's arrival passed with excruciating slowness. Millicent changed her dress twice, settled on a becoming gown of sage green, then chided herself for such uncharacteristic vanity. What did it matter how she looked? The Duke was probably coming to inform her that their friendship had been misconstrued and must end to avoid further gossip. At precisely 3 o'clock, the Duke's carriage drew up outside. Millicent watched from the window as he descended, looking more formal than usual in a dark blue coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. Her heart gave an inconvenient flutter. He was shown into the drawing-room, where Millicent and her aunt awaited him. After exchanging pleasantries, Lady Templeton made a transparent excuse about needing to write letters and left them alone, though with the door conspicuously ajar, as propriety demanded. The Duke remained standing, his posture rigid. "Miss Osborne, I will come directly to the point. Last night's incident has led to considerable speculation about the nature of our association." "I am aware," Millicent said quietly. "Lady Harrington has been most industrious in her gossip." "Indeed." He began to pace, a sign of agitation she had never observed in him before. "Under normal circumstances, I would ignore such idle talk. However, in this instance, I find myself concerned about the potential damage to your reputation." Millicent felt a sinking sensation. "I see. You wish to distance yourself to quell the rumors." "Quite the opposite." He stopped pacing and faced her directly. "I wish to propose marriage." For perhaps the first time in her life, Millicent Osborne was rendered speechless. The Duke misinterpreted her silence. "I realize this is sudden, but I believe it would be the most sensible solution to our predicament." Millicent found her voice. "Sensible? You propose marriage as a sensible solution?" He frowned. "Is that not a reasonable approach? We enjoy each other's company, we are compatible in intellect and temperament, and marriage would put an end to the gossip while securing your position in society." "How remarkably practical of you, Your Grace," Millicent said, her voice cool. "And yet, I find myself unconvinced by your argument." The Duke looked genuinely confused. "You refuse." "I neither accept nor refuse, as I do not consider that a proper proposal." She rose from her seat, her chin lifted in defiance. "Marriage is not a business arrangement to be entered into for convenience or to satisfy society's expectations. It should be a union based on mutual respect, affection, and, dare I say it, love." "Love," he repeated, as though the word were foreign to him. "You speak of love as though it were a prerequisite for matrimony. Among our class, it is rarely even a consideration." "Perhaps that explains the general state of unhappiness I observe in so many married couples of our acquaintance," Millicent retorted. "I may not have your rank or fortune, Your Grace, but I do have principles. I will not marry without affection, not even to a duke." The Duke's expression hardened. "I see. You find the idea of marriage to me so repugnant that not even the prospect of becoming a duchess can tempt you." "That is not at all what I said," Millicent exclaimed, exasperated. "I find the idea of marriage without love repugnant, regardless of the title attached. And you, sir, have spoken of compatibility and convenience, but not once of affection." They stared at each other, at an impasse. The Duke was the first to break the silence. "I shall take my leave, Miss Osborne. I apologize for having caused you distress." With a stiff bow, he departed, leaving Millicent to collapse back into her chair, wondering how a day that had begun with such promise could end in such disaster. The Duke, meanwhile, returned to his town house in a state of such obvious agitation that his butler, normally impassive, raised an eyebrow in concern. "Is everything quite all right, Your Grace?" "Perfectly," the Duke snapped, striding past him and up the grand staircase to his private study. Once alone, he poured himself a generous measure of brandy and stared moodily out of the window. Refused. He, the Duke of Westmoreland, refused by a country nobody with more opinions than pounds to her name. It was insupportable. And yet. As his initial anger cooled, he found himself reluctantly admiring Miss Osborne's stance. She had principles and the courage to stand by them even at the cost of what most young ladies would consider a brilliant match. It was refreshing. Admirable, even. But love? What did love have to do with marriage? His own parents' union, though arranged, had been perfectly adequate. They had maintained separate lives within the same household, each fulfilling their respective duties without emotional complications. It was the way of their world. Except he could not imagine such an arrangement with Millicent Osborne. The thought of her living in his house but leading a separate life, of conversing only at dinner parties or when necessary for appearances, felt oddly hollow. He had become accustomed to their spirited discussions, to the way her eyes lit up when she was making a particularly passionate point, to the sound of her laughter when he managed to amuse her. Was that love? This discomfort at the thought of her absence? This desire to continue their conversations indefinitely? This strange, unprecedented urge to make her happy? The Duke poured another brandy and faced an uncomfortable truth. He had no idea what love was, having never experienced it nor observed it closely. His proposal had been logical, practical, and completely inadequate. The following days passed in a haze of social obligations that neither the Duke nor Millicent had any desire to attend but could not avoid without causing comment. They encountered each other at a musical evening, a dinner party, and a rout, each time exchanging polite but distant greetings that left both feeling increasingly miserable. The Tun, of course, noticed the change. There must have been a falling out, Lady Harrington declared authoritatively to her circle. She likely overreached herself, setting her cap at a duke. I think not, countered the Countess of Pembroke, who had observed the pair more carefully. Miss Osborne shows no signs of disappointment, and the Duke watches her when he thinks no one is looking. There is more to this story than meets the eye. The Countess was right, as usual. The Duke did watch Millicent, noting how she seemed paler than before, how her smiles never quite reached her eyes. He found himself wondering if she regretted her refusal, then immediately castigated himself for the thought. Pride kept him from approaching her, from acknowledging that perhaps, just perhaps, she had been right. It was Lady Templeton who eventually took matters into her own hands. After a week of watching her niece drift about the house like a particularly melancholy ghost, she sent a note to the Duke requesting his presence on a matter of urgent importance. When he arrived, clearly expecting to find Millicent, Lady Templeton received him alone. "Your Grace, I shall be direct. My niece is unhappy, and I believe you are the cause." The Duke stiffened. Miss Osborne made her feelings quite clear, Lady Templeton. She rejected my proposal. Did she? Or did she reject the manner of it? Lady Templeton fixed him with a penetrating gaze. Millicent has always had romantic notions, I'm afraid. Gets it from reading too many novels. She believes in marrying for love. So she informed me, the Duke said dryly. And you, I imagine, proposed marriage as one might propose a business merger. The Duke had the grace to look slightly abashed. I may have emphasized the practical aspects. Lady Templeton sighed. Young people today. In my day, we understood that love often grows after marriage, not before. But Millicent, she has always been headstrong, always believed in following her heart. A dangerous philosophy. Perhaps. But answer me this, Your Grace, why did you propose to my niece? Was it truly just to silence gossip and provide her with position? The Duke hesitated. Those were factors. But not the only ones. He met her gaze directly. No. Not the only ones. Lady Templeton nodded, satisfied. I thought as much. Millicent is currently visiting her friend Miss Rutherford at their country estate. They departed yesterday and planned to stay for a se'night. The house is called Thornfield Hall, near the village of Westbury in Wiltshire. She rose, signaling the end of the interview. I mention this merely as a point of interest, of course. The Duke's lips twitched in what might almost have been a smile. Of course. Thank you for the information, Lady Templeton. 2 days later, Millicent was wandering the gardens of Thornfield Hall, ostensibly admiring the roses but in reality brooding on her situation. Charlotte had been a sympathetic listener, but even her cheerful company couldn't dispel the cloud that had settled over Millicent since the Duke's disastrous proposal. She had done the right thing, she was certain. Marriage without love was unthinkable. And yet she missed him. Missed their conversations, their debates, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was trying not to smile at one of her more outrageous statements. A sound made her turn, the unmistakable rhythm of approaching hoofbeats. A lone rider appeared on the path, and Millicent's heart performed a most undignified somersault in her chest. Even at a distance, she would know that straight-backed posture anywhere. The Duke reined in his horse a few yards away and dismounted with fluid grace. He approached slowly, as though giving her time to flee if she wished. Millicent stood her ground, though her hands, clasped tightly before her, betrayed her nervousness. Miss Osborne. Your Grace. This is unexpected. Is it? He came to a halt before her, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. I believe your aunt may have had a hand in arranging this chance encounter. Despite herself, Millicent smiled. Aunt Templeton does have a tendency to meddle. But why are you here, Your Grace? Frederick, he said abruptly. I beg your pardon. My name is Frederick. And I am here because... He paused, seeming to struggle for words, an unusual state for a man normally so articulate. Because I have been a fool. Millicent's eyebrows rose. Indeed? That seems unlike you. On the contrary, it seems I have been a fool for some time without realizing it. He took a step closer. You were right, Millicent. About marriage. About affection. I proposed to you in the most unromantic way possible, emphasizing convenience and practicality when I should have spoken of my feelings. Your feelings, she echoed, hardly daring to hope. Yes, feelings. It appears I have developed quite a number of them where you are concerned. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of agitation she found endearing. I find myself thinking of you constantly. I miss our conversations. I miss your laugh. I miss the way you challenge me and refuse to be intimidated by my rank or my admittedly difficult personality. Millicent's heart was racing. Frederick. I cannot promise to be demonstrative or to express myself easily, he continued, as though afraid that if he stopped, he might never find the courage to continue. But I can promise that what I feel for you is genuine and deep. It may not be the romantic love of your novels, but it is the most I have ever felt for anyone. And I believe it could grow into something even more profound, given time. Millicent's eyes filled with tears. That, she said softly, was a much better proposal. Does that mean, it means, Frederick, that I have missed you too? That I value our conversations more than any others? That I find myself thinking of things to tell you throughout the day, only to remember that I cannot? She took a step toward him. It means that I believe what we feel for each other is already halfway to love, if not further. The Duke, Frederick, closed the remaining distance between them and took her hands in his. Then will you marry me, Millicent Osborne? Not for convenience or position, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you. His smile then, rare, genuine, transformative, was worth all the uncertainty that had preceded it. Their courtship proceeded with remarkable speed after that, with a formal engagement announced upon their return to London. The Ton was abuzz with the news, with reactions ranging from delight, the Countess of Pembroke, to disbelief, Lady Harrington, to resignation, the mammas of eligible daughters throughout Mayfair. The Duke, to everyone's surprise, seemed almost cheerful as the wedding preparations progressed. He was seen smiling in public on at least 3 occasions, causing Lady Harrington to speculate widely about French medicines and their effects on the constitution. The wedding itself was a grand affair, as befitted the Duke's station, though with personal touches that reflected the bride's influence. Millicent wore not the expected white but a gown of pale gold that made her skin glow and her eyes shine like amber. The Duke, watching her walk down the aisle toward him, felt a surge of emotion so powerful that it nearly brought him to his knees. Their vows were traditional but spoken with a conviction that moved even the most cynical observers. And when the Duke kissed his bride, with a tenderness that belied his usually reserved demeanor, there was scarcely a dry eye in the church. The wedding breakfast that followed was held at the Duke's town house, a magnificent mansion that would now be Millicent's home. As guests congratulated the newlyweds and helped themselves to champagne, the Duke drew his bride aside for a moment of privacy. "Are you happy, Duchess?" he asked, the new title making Millicent blush with pleasure. "Extraordinarily so," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "Though I confess to some nervousness about managing such a large household. Your standards for cleanliness are rather legendary, you know." The Duke laughed, a sound that still startled those who knew him well. "You'll manage admirably, I have no doubt. And if not, we shall simply hire more staff." Little did either of them suspect that their first marital disagreement would come sooner rather than later, and over the very subject Millicent had joked about. The day after their wedding, as most of the guests departed for London, the Duke took his new wife on a tour of their country estate, Westmoreland Park. The house was magnificent, a perfect example of classical architecture set amid rolling parklands and formal gardens. Inside, it was equally impressive, with high-ceilinged rooms furnished with exquisite taste and historical artifacts collected by generations of Jamesons. The Duke's private chambers, a suite of rooms including a bedchamber, dressing room, and study, were particularly fine. The study, lined with leather-bound books and featuring a massive desk of polished oak, was clearly his sanctuary. "This is where I spend most of my time when in residence," he explained, gesturing to the comfortable armchair by the window. "The light is excellent for reading, and the view of the gardens is most pleasant." Millicent nodded, taking in the immaculate arrangement of papers on the desk, the precisely aligned quills and inkwells, the complete absence of dust on any surface. It was, like its owner, perfectly ordered. Their wedding night had been a revelation, with the Duke proving that his reserve did not extend to the bedchamber. Millicent, still glowing from their shared intimacy, felt a new confidence in her position as his wife and partner. "It's a lovely room," she said, moving to examine the books on his shelves. "Though perhaps a bit austere? Some flowers might brighten it." The Duke's expression flickered. "I prefer not to have cut flowers in my study. The petals drop and create mess." "Ah." Millicent ran her finger along the spine of a volume, leaving a faint mark in the otherwise pristine surface. "Well, perhaps a painting, then? That landscape by Turner we admired in London would look well on this wall. The arrangement of this room has been carefully considered for maximum efficiency and comfort," the Duke said, his tone cooler than before. "I see no need for changes." Millicent turned to face him, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Frederick, I was merely suggesting, and I am declining your suggestion," he interrupted, more sharply than he had intended. Seeing her hurt expression, he moderated his tone. "Forgive me. This room has always been my personal domain, arranged exactly as I prefer it. I am unaccustomed to considering another's preferences in such matters." Millicent nodded slowly. "I understand. And as your wife, I should respect your private space." She moved toward the door, then paused. "I wonder, though, if you might extend the same courtesy to me." "What do you mean?" "The Duchess's chambers," she said. "I would like to arrange them according to my own taste, without interference. Even if that includes drop petals." The Duke hesitated, clearly struggling with the concept. "The entire house has always been maintained to my standards. And now it will be maintained to our standards," Millicent corrected gently. "Different in some rooms, perhaps, but no less valid for that." She left him to consider this revolutionary concept, making her way to the suite of rooms that had been prepared for her as the new Duchess. They were beautiful, certainly, decorated in shades of blue and gold, with delicate French furniture and silk hangings, but impersonal, bearing no mark of her character or preferences. a maid was tidying the dressing room when Millicent entered. "Oh, Your Grace, I didn't expect you so soon. I was just making sure everything is in perfect order, as the Duke insists." "Thank you," Millicent said, smiling at the girl's nervousness. "But you needn't worry so. I'm sure everything is lovely." "The Duke is very particular, Your Grace," the maid confided. "Especially about dust. He's been known to check the tops of picture frames with his white gloves." Millicent laughed. "Well, I promise not to be quite so exacting. What's your name?" "Sarah, Your Grace." "Well, Sarah, I believe you and I shall get along splendidly. Now, could you help me unpack my books? I'd like to arrange them on that empty shelf by the window." The afternoon passed pleasantly as Millicent began to make the rooms her own, adding personal touches, a cushion embroidered by her mother, books of poetry and novels that would have made the Duke shudder, a somewhat haphazard arrangement of mementos on the mantelpiece. By evening, the Duchess's chambers had been transformed from a showpiece into a home. The Duke, when he came to escort her to dinner, paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the changes. "You've been busy," he observed. "Yes," Millicent agreed, watching him carefully. "Do you disapprove?" He considered the question seriously. "It is different from what I am accustomed to. More personal." "That was the intention." "I see." He offered her his arm. "Shall we go down? Cook has prepared your favorite dessert in honor of your first night at Westmoreland Park." The subject was dropped, but not forgotten. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. The Duke maintained his strict standards in the public rooms and his own chambers, while Millicent created a more relaxed atmosphere in her suite. It was a compromise of sorts, though one that neither found entirely satisfying. The real test came a week after their arrival, when the Duke entered Millicent's sitting room to find her surrounded by an explosion of fabric samples, ribbons, and sketches, consulting with the housekeeper and a seamstress from the village. "What," he asked, with dangerous calm, "is happening here?" Millicent looked up, her expression caught between guilt and defiance. "We're discussing new curtains for the morning room, and perhaps some slipcovers for the furniture. It's all so dark and heavy, Frederick. I thought something lighter for spring would be lovely." The housekeeper, Mrs. Powell, a formidable woman who had managed Westmoreland Park for 15 years, looked distinctly uncomfortable. "I explained to Her Grace that all changes to the house must be approved by you, Your Grace." "Indeed they must," the Duke agreed, his jaw tight. "Particularly changes that involve disrupting rooms that have remained unchanged for generations." Millicent dismissed the seamstress and Mrs. Powell with a smile and a nod, waiting until they had left before addressing her husband. "Frederick, I understand your attachment to tradition, but surely some small changes would not be catastrophic." "It is not about tradition," he said stiffly. "It is about order, about maintaining the standards that have always prevailed at Westmoreland Park." "Your standards," Millicent pointed out. "But I am the Duchess now, and surely I should have some say in how our home is arranged." "Our home," he repeated, emphasizing the first word. "Not yours alone to rearrange at whim. Nor yours alone to maintain as a museum," Millicent retorted, her temper rising to match his. "A home should be lived in, Frederick, not preserved in amber." They glared at each other, at an impasse. Finally, the Duke spoke, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "I have tolerated the disorder in your personal chambers out of respect for your wishes. But I cannot and will not allow the rest of the house to fall into a similar state of chaos." "Chaos?" Millicent repeated incredulously. "New curtains are hardly chaos, Frederick." "And tolerated?" "How generous of you to tolerate my existence in your perfectly ordered world." "That is not what I meant, isn't it? Since our arrival, you have tolerated my presence but made it clear that nothing must change, that the Duke of Westmoreland's way is the only acceptable way. Well, I have news for you, husband. I am not one of your servants to be ordered about and expected to maintain your precious standards without question." The Duke's expression hardened. "Perhaps if you understood the importance of maintaining those standards, we would not be having this discussion." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Millicent said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You value order above all things, above comfort, above happiness, certainly above my feelings. Well, I refuse to live in a mausoleum, Frederick. Either we find a way to make this house a home for both of us, or what?" he challenged. "Or I shall return to London without you." The threat hung in the air between them, shocking them both with its seriousness. The Duke turned on his heel and strode from the room without another word, leaving Millicent to sink onto a chair, trembling with emotion. That evening, they dined in frosty silence, the footman exchanging worried glances as the Duke and Duchess spoke only when absolutely necessary and avoided meeting each other's eyes. After dinner, they retired to separate chambers for the first time since their wedding night. Millicent spent a restless night, alternating between righteous indignation and nagging doubt. Had she overreacted? Perhaps. But Frederick's inflexibility was intolerable. A marriage should be a partnership, not a dictatorship. And yet, she loved him. The thought of returning to London alone, of their promising beginning ending in such disillusionment, was unbearable. The Duke, for his part, paced his study until the early hours, his mind in turmoil. Millicent's threat had shaken him more than he cared to admit. The prospect of losing her, of returning to his orderly but empty existence, filled him with a dread he had never experienced before. And yet, was she not being unreasonable? His standards had maintained Westmoreland Park as one of the finest estates in England. Why should he compromise those standards simply because his wife preferred a more casual approach to housekeeping? But then, had he not married Millicent precisely because she challenged him? Because she saw the world differently and was not afraid to say so? Was this not just another instance of the spirited independence that had attracted him in the first place? Dawn found him still wrestling with these questions, no closer to a resolution but increasingly aware that he had, perhaps, been less than fair in his assessment of the situation. Millicent rose early, having given up on sleep, and decided to take a walk in the gardens to clear her head. The morning was fresh and bright, the dew still clinging to the grass as she followed the path through the rose garden and toward the small lake that formed the centerpiece of the landscaped grounds. She was so lost in thought that she almost collided with her husband, who was returning from his own early morning constitutional. "Frederick," she exclaimed, startled. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Nor I you," he replied, his expression guarded. "You usually sleep later." "I found sleep elusive last night." "As did I." They stood awkwardly, neither sure how to proceed after their quarrel. It was the Duke who finally broke the silence. "I have been thinking about our discussion yesterday." "As have I," Millicent admitted. "And I have come to the conclusion that perhaps I have been somewhat inflexible." Millicent's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Indeed?" "Yes." He gestured to a nearby bench. "Shall we sit? This may be a lengthy conversation." They settled side by side, a careful distance between them. The Duke stared out over the lake, gathering his thoughts. "I have always valued order," he began. "It has been a constant in my life, when many other things were not. My parents, while dutiful, were not demonstrative. My father, in particular, valued precision and correctness above all. Any deviation from his standards was met with disapproval." Millicent listened, beginning to understand. "So you learned early that perfection was the only acceptable state?" "Yes." He glanced at her, then away. "It became a habit, a comfort even. If everything was in its place, if every surface was spotless, if every routine was followed exactly, then all was well with the world. I could control that, even when I could control nothing else." "Oh, Frederick," Millicent said softly, her heart aching for the lonely boy he must have been. "When I brought you here," he continued, "I expected you to fit into the order I had established. That was unreasonable of me. You are not a piece of furniture to be positioned and polished. You are my wife, with your own preferences and ideas." "Yes," Millicent agreed, hope beginning to bloom in her chest. "But perhaps I was too quick to dismiss your need for order. It is part of who you are, and I should respect that." The Duke turned to face her fully. I believe what we need is compromise. A word I have had little use for until now, I must admit. Millicent smiled. Compromise. Yes, I think that might work. But what would it look like in practice? I'm not entirely sure, the Duke confessed. But perhaps we could start with your curtains for the morning room. I admit the current ones are rather somber. Really? Millicent's face lit up. You wouldn't mind? I might mind a little, he said honestly. But I mind the thought of you leaving far more. Impulsively, Millicent reached for his hand. I wouldn't have gone, you know. Not really. I was angry and frustrated, but this is where I belong. With you. The Duke, Frederick squeezed her hand, his expression softening in a way that made her heart skip. And I belong with you, even if it means enduring a few scattered cushions and dropped rose petals. A few? Millicent teased. I was thinking of entire bouquets in every room. Let's not get carried away, he warned, but there was a smile in his eyes that hadn't been there before. They returned to the house hand in hand, their quarrel resolved if not forgotten. Over the following weeks, a new pattern emerged at Westmoreland Park. The Duke maintained his exacting standards in his study and the library, while Millicent was given free rein in the morning room, her chambers, and the small sitting room adjoining the dining room. The public rooms were a compromise, still elegant and well-maintained, but with touches of warmth and personality that had been lacking before. The true test of their new understanding came one morning when the Duke entered his study to find a vase of freshly cut roses on his desk, clearly placed there by his wife. His first instinct was to remove them immediately. Flowers meant fallen petals, water rings, potential disorder. But as he reached for the vase, he hesitated. The roses were arranged with obvious care, their scent filling the room with a freshness that was not unpleasant. And more importantly, they represented Millicent's effort to share something she loved with him, in a way that respected his space. The vase was placed on a small tray that would catch any water or petals, and the arrangement was modest rather than overwhelming. After a moment's deliberation, the Duke left the roses where they were. When Millicent checked later, finding them still in place, her smile was worth any amount of potential disorder. Their marriage settled into a rhythm of compromise and mutual respect, each learning to appreciate the other's perspective even when they disagreed. The Duke found himself becoming more flexible, while Millicent developed a new appreciation for the peace that order could bring. It was some months later, as autumn painted the grounds of Westmoreland Park in shades of gold and russet, that the ultimate test of their understanding arose. The Duke, returning from a meeting with his steward, found the door to his study ajar, unusual, as he always closed it when leaving. Inside, he discovered a scene of unexpected disorder. Books had been removed from shelves and stacked haphazardly on his desk. Papers were shuffled out of their usual precise alignment. And in the midst of this chaos stood his wife, a duster in one hand and a determined expression on her face. "Millicent," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "What are you doing?" She turned, startled. "Frederick! I didn't expect you back so soon." "Evidently not." "I repeat, what are you doing in my study?" Millicent had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Cleaning, or trying to. Mrs. Powell mentioned that the maids are afraid to touch anything in here for fear of disturbing your arrangement, so the dust has been accumulating. I thought I would take care of it myself, since I know how particular you are." The Duke surveyed the disruption of his carefully ordered sanctuary. 6 months ago, such a scene would have sent him into a cold rage. Now, he found himself struggling between annoyance and an unexpected appreciation for his wife's intentions. "I see," he said finally. "And did it not occur to you to ask me first?" "I wanted to surprise you," Millicent admitted. "I thought you would be pleased to find everything spotless without having to supervise the process yourself." The Duke approached his desk, noting with some dismay that his correspondence had been shuffled out of chronological order. "While I appreciate the sentiment, Millicent, I would prefer to maintain my study myself. There is a system to how everything is arranged, one that may not be apparent to anyone else." Millicent's expression fell. "I'm sorry, Frederick. I didn't mean to disturb your system." I'll put everything back exactly as it was. No, he said, surprising himself as much as her. You've begun the task, we shall finish it together. But in future, perhaps you could simply remind me when the dusting needs to be done, rather than taking matters into your own hands. Millicent's face brightened. Really? You're not angry? I am mildly vexed, he admitted. But not angry. Your intentions were good, even if your execution was somewhat chaotic. She laughed, relieved. Well, I suppose that's progress. 6 months ago, you would have banished me from the room. 6 months ago, you would never have dared enter without permission, he pointed out. We have both changed, I think. For the better. Decidedly so. He rolled up his sleeves, a sight so unexpected that Millicent stared. Now, shall we restore order to this chaos? You dust, I'll reorganize. They worked together companionably, the Duke directing the placement of each book and paper while Millicent tackled the dust that had indeed accumulated in the less accessible corners. As they worked, they talked about the estate, about plans for the upcoming Christmas season, about the possibility of visiting Millicent's family in Somerset before winter made travel difficult. It was as the Duke was replacing the last volume on its shelf that Millicent, attempting to reach a cobweb in a high corner, lost her balance on the library steps. He moved with unexpected speed, catching her before she could fall, the duster flying from her hand to land on his head in a most undignified manner. For a moment, they froze in tableau, the Duke holding his wife, dust settling around them like snow, a streak of dirt across Millicent's cheek, and the ridiculous duster perched on his head like some exotic hat. Millicent was the first to break, a giggle escaping despite her best efforts to suppress it. The Duke's expression remained stern for precisely 3 seconds before cracking into a reluctant smile, which grew into a chuckle, which developed into the first full-throated laugh Millicent had ever heard from him. Your face, she gasped, clinging to his shoulders. Oh, Frederick, if you could see yourself. I can imagine, he said dryly, still holding her securely. I must look absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely, she agreed, reaching up to remove the duster. And absolutely wonderful. Their eyes met, laughter fading into something warmer, deeper. The Duke, Frederick, drew her closer, dust and disorder forgotten in the more immediate desire to kiss his wife. Later, much later, as they lay together in the Duchess's chambers, now their shared bedroom more often than not, Millicent propped herself on one elbow to study her husband's relaxed features. Who would have thought, she mused, that the Duke of Westmoreland, terror of housekeepers throughout England, would one day be caught with a duster on his head and laugh about it? Frederick captured her free hand, bringing it to his lips. Who indeed? I certainly never imagined such a possibility before you entered my life. Are you sorry, she asked, suddenly serious, that I've disrupted your perfectly ordered existence? He considered the question with the thoughtfulness that was so characteristic of him. No, he said finally. Order without joy is merely emptiness disguised as control. You've brought disorder, yes, but also happiness. It's a trade I would make again without hesitation. Millicent smiled, touched by his honesty. And I would choose you and your exasperating standards again, just as readily. Exasperating, he repeated, raising an eyebrow. Exacting, she amended with a grin. Precise. Meticulous. Better, he approved, pulling her down for another kiss. 3 years later, the Duke and Duchess of Westmoreland were considered one of the more successful matches of their generation, despite initial skepticism from the ton. Their London entertainments were elegant without being stuffy, their country estate a perfect blend of grandeur and comfort. They had produced an heir, young Lord James, now approaching his 2nd birthday, and were rumoured to be expecting another addition to the family. But perhaps the most surprising development, at least to those who had known the Duke before his marriage, was the change in his demeanour. While still dignified and occasionally formidable, he was known to smile more frequently, particularly in the presence of his wife and son. There were even reports, though these were more difficult to credit, that he had been seen laughing openly during a game of hide-and-seek with Lord James in the gardens of Westmoreland Park. The couple's visits to London were less frequent now, as they preferred the freedom of country life, but when they did appear in society, they were much in demand. It was during one such visit, at a dinner party hosted by the Countess of Pembroke, that Lady Harrington finally voiced the question that had intrigued the ton for years. "Tell me, Duchess," she said, with her usual lack of subtlety, "how did you manage to transform the most fastidious bachelor in England into such a contented husband? There must be some secret to it." Millicent exchanged an amused glance with her husband, who was engaged in conversation across the table but had an uncanny ability to sense when his wife was being interrogated. "No secret at all, Lady Harrington," she replied. "Simply the recognition that people can change without losing themselves, if given the right motivation." "How charmingly vague," Lady Harrington complained. "But surely there must have been challenges?" The Duke was known for his exacting standards, after all. Millicent smiled, remembering the defining moment in Frederick's study. "There was one occasion," she admitted, "when the Duke ordered me to clean his room or leave, but I handed him the broom and left him speechless instead." "You didn't?" Lady Harrington exclaimed, scandalized and delighted in equal measure. "She most certainly did," the Duke confirmed, joining the conversation with impeccable timing. "And it was the moment I knew, beyond any doubt, that I had married the perfect woman for me." "How so?" asked the Countess of Pembroke, intrigued. "Because," the Duke said, his eyes meeting his wife's with a warmth that belied his reputation for coldness, "she refused to be intimidated by my temper or my rank. She challenged me to be better, to reconsider my priorities. In short, she loved me enough to hand me a broom and expect me to use it." "And did you?" Lady Harrington couldn't resist asking. The Duke's smile was enigmatic. "Let's just say that I learned a valuable lesson about the importance of flexibility in marriage, and about the joy that can be found in unexpected places, even in the midst of disorder." As the conversation moved on to other topics, the Duke reached under the table to take his wife's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze that spoke volumes. Millicent returned the pressure, her heart full of contentment. For in the end, dear reader, the greatest love stories are not those without conflict, but those in which conflict leads to understanding, and understanding to a deeper, more resilient bond. The Duke of Westmoreland had found his perfect match in a woman who was neither intimidated by his status nor deterred by his flaws. And Millicent had found her heart's desire in a man who, beneath his rigid exterior, possessed the capacity for growth and change that marks true character. Together, they had created a home that was both ordered and joyful, a marriage that was both respectful and passionate, and a life that, while perhaps not as perfectly arranged as the Duke might once have preferred, was infinitely richer for its occasional moments of beautiful chaos. And if, occasionally, the staff at Westmoreland Park were startled to find their master with a duster in hand, assisting his wife in some domestic task, well, that was a piece of gossip too delicious not to share, but only in the strictest confidence, of course. The end.